February 2022 is when the world watched Russia launch its full-scale invasion of Ukraine. But the conflict didn't suddenly begin that morning. By the time the first missiles hit, years of political tension, competing ambitions, and unresolved history had already pushed both countries to the brink. To understand why Europe found itself facing its biggest war in generations, we have to go back to 1991, when the Soviet Union collapsed and completely changed the political map of Europe. Before we begin, don't forget to subscribe if you enjoy videos like this. All right, now let's get into it. For Russia, the collapse of the Soviet Union was one of the biggest shocks in its history. In just a few months, Moscow lost control of 15 republics that had once formed the Soviet Union. Among all of them, Ukraine mattered more than almost any other. It was home to more than 50 million people, vast stretches of fertile farmland, major industries, and strategic ports along the Black Sea. More importantly, Russia and Ukraine shared centuries of intertwined history. Many Russians saw Ukraine as an inseparable part of their own past. For Ukrainians, however, 1991 represented something entirely different. Independence was more than a political change. It was the first real opportunity in generations to decide their own future without Moscow making those choices for them. Ukraine also inherited something no newly independent country had ever possessed before: the world's third largest nuclear arsenal. Thousands of nuclear weapons were left on Ukrainian territory after the Soviet Union collapsed. In 1994, Ukraine agreed to give up those weapons by signing the Budapest Memorandum. In return, Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom committed themselves to respecting Ukraine's independence, sovereignty, and internationally recognized borders. Back then, the agreement was widely seen as a success. Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons in exchange for security assurances, and few expected that one of the countries making those promises would later invade it. While Ukraine was trying to establish itself as an independent nation, Russia was going through one of the most difficult periods in its modern history. The 1990s brought economic collapse, widespread corruption, political instability, and a sharp fall in living standards. Millions of Russians saw their savings disappear, businesses fail, and the country's global influence shrink. The Soviet Union was gone. NATO, once created to counter Soviet power, was still expanding. Former Soviet allies in Eastern European countries were joining the Western Alliance. To many people in the West, NATO expansion represented the spread of democracy and security. To many people in Russia, it looked very different. It appeared as though Russia was being pushed aside, while Western influence moved closer and closer to its borders. This feeling became even stronger when Vladimir Putin rose to power in 1999. Putin believed that Russia's decline had gone too far. His goal was to restore stability, strengthen the state, and return Russia to great power status. Over time, he increasingly viewed the world as a competition between powerful nations fighting for influence. In that worldview, Ukraine occupied a special place. Putin repeatedly argued that Russians and Ukrainians shared one historical civilization. He viewed Ukraine not merely as a neighboring country, but as part of a larger Russian historical space. The problem was that many Ukrainians disagreed. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, Ukraine remained divided politically. Some regions favored closer ties with Europe. Others preferred stronger relations with Russia. This division came to a head during the 2004 presidential election. When the pro-Russian candidate Viktor Yanukovych was declared the winner, widespread allegations of electoral fraud triggered massive demonstrations. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians flooded the streets demanding fair elections. The movement became known as the Orange Revolution. Eventually, a new vote was held, and the pro-Western candidate Viktor Yushchenko won. The message was clear. A significant portion of Ukrainian society wanted closer integration with Europe and democratic institutions. For Moscow, this was an alarming development. The Kremlin increasingly viewed popular democratic movements in former Soviet states as threats to Russian influence. Over the following years, Ukraine struggled with corruption, economic difficulties, and political infighting. Progress was slow. Public frustration grew. In 2010, Viktor Yanukovych returned to the presidency. At first, he tried to maintain good relations with both Russia and the European Union. That balancing act became much harder in 2013. After years of negotiations, Ukraine was preparing to sign an association agreement with the European Union. Many Ukrainians believed the deal would open the door to economic reform, stronger institutions, and closer ties with Europe. Then, just days before signing the agreement, Yanukovych abruptly backed away and accepted economic support from Russia instead. The reaction was immediate. Thousands of protesters gathered in Kiev's Independence Square, known as Maidan. What began as a student protest soon evolved into a nationwide movement. People were not only demanding closer ties with Europe, they were demanding accountability, reform, and a government that represented their interests. The demonstrations lasted for months. As violence escalated, clashes between protesters and security forces left more than 100 people dead. After Yanukovych fled the country in February 2014, the Ukrainian parliament voted that he had abandoned his duties and appointed an interim government. To many Ukrainians, this was a popular uprising against corruption. To Putin, it looked like a Western-backed coup. Within days, Russia acted. Armed soldiers wearing unmarked uniforms appeared across Crimea, the strategically important peninsula on the Black Sea that had been transferred from Russia to Ukraine in 1954 during the Soviet era. Russian forces quickly secured government buildings, military bases, and key infrastructure. A referendum was organized under Russian military control. Soon afterward, Russia formally annexed Crimea. The move shocked the world. It was one of the most significant territorial annexations in Europe since World War II. But Crimea was only the beginning. In eastern Ukraine, particularly in the Donetsk and Luhansk regions, armed separatist movements emerged. From 2014 to 2021, thousands of people were killed and millions were displaced. Despite several ceasefire agreements, fighting never completely stopped. At the same time, Ukraine moved steadily closer to the West. Its military received training and support from NATO members. Economic ties with the European Union grew stronger, and public support for joining Western institutions steadily increased. Ironically, Russia's actions after 2014 pushed many Ukrainians further away from Moscow and closer to Europe. For Putin, this trend was unacceptable. By late 2021, Russia had assembled nearly 200,000 troops near Ukraine's borders. Western intelligence agencies warned that an invasion was coming. Many people remained skeptical. Even some Ukrainian officials believed Russia was using military pressure as a negotiating tactic. Then came February 24th, 2022. Before dawn, Putin announced what he called a special military operation. Moments later, missiles struck targets across Ukraine. Russian forces attacked from the north, east, and south, the largest war in Europe since World War II had begun. The Kremlin claimed it was acting to protect Russian speakers, prevent NATO expansion, and secure Russia's interests. Most of the world rejected those explanations. Russian leaders appeared to expect a quick victory. Instead, Ukrainian resistance proved far stronger than anticipated. President Volodymyr Zelensky refused to leave Kyiv. The Ukrainian military, strengthened by years of training and motivated by the defense of their homeland, fought far more effectively than many observers expected. Russian advances stalled. The attempt to capture Kyiv failed. By April 2022, Russian forces had withdrawn from northern Ukraine. What was expected to be a rapid victory turned into a prolonged and devastating war. The international response was unlike anything seen in recent decades. The United States, the European Union, the United Kingdom, Canada, Japan, and many other countries imposed severe sanctions on Russia. Hundreds of billions of dollars in Russian assets were frozen, many international companies left the Russian market, and Ukraine began receiving large amounts of military, financial, and humanitarian assistance. The conflict soon became more than a war between two countries. It became a global geopolitical struggle. The consequences extended far beyond the battlefield. Ukraine and Russia are major exporters of grain and energy resources. The war disrupted global food supplies, increased energy prices, and contributed to inflation around the world. Millions of Ukrainians became refugees. Entire cities were reduced to ruins. Investigations into alleged war crimes drew international attention. The conflict also transformed national identities. Before 2014, many Ukrainians maintained complex and often friendly attitudes toward Russia. After years of war and the full-scale invasion, those attitudes changed dramatically. The invasion accelerated the growth of a stronger Ukrainian national identity. Many Ukrainians who once felt culturally connected to Russia began defining themselves in opposition to it. As the war continued, neither side achieved a decisive breakthrough. Russia controlled significant territory but faced enormous military and economic costs. Ukraine continued to resist but relied heavily on foreign assistance. Peace negotiations repeatedly stalled because both sides viewed the stakes as existential. Ukraine demanded the restoration of its territory. Russia refused to abandon its gains. This is why many historians argue that the war was not caused by a single event. It emerged from decades of unresolved tensions. The collapse of the Soviet Union, NATO expansion, competing national identities, political revolutions, Crimea's annexation, the war in Donbas, and the ambitions of political leaders all contributed to a chain of events that gradually narrowed the path toward peace. By the time Russian forces crossed the border in 2022, the foundations of conflict had already been built. The tragedy of Ukraine and Russia is that both nations share centuries of interconnected history, yet today that shared history has become one of the main reasons they are fighting. If you enjoy deep dives into the events that have shaped our world, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss our next video. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.